Welcome everybody to this Ask the Expert session. Today we're talking about defending against advanced threats with Microsoft security. My name is Scott Woodgate and I'll introduce my co-speakers in a minute. But before I do that, just a reminder, do use the chat function to ask us questions. Myself, my fellow folks, and actually a broad group of Microsoft experts are on this discussion to help address your questions. Feel free to upvote any of those questions with a thumb so that we can see the more prominent ones from the long list of questions. And we will go over as many of these as we can get through over time. Obviously, we may not be able to get all of them. And the session, of course, is being recorded. Obviously, don't spam or any of those things. I think you guys know the way this works. Here's the official code of conduct. Isn't that pretty? And with that, just quickly introducing ourselves. My name's Scott, as I said. I look after Microsoft security, things like Sentinel, also do marketing for Defender, Azure Defender, and Microsoft 365 Defender, as well as platform security. We've got Nicholas here, who is our security Jedi, has lots of expertise in a wide variety of areas, in particular Azure security. And then we've got Zvi on the Microsoft 365 Defender side, also very strong technical expert. So hit us with broad questions, hit us with specific questions, and we'll do the best to help you through that. So with that, I am going to get out of PowerPoint and go directly to a quick warm-up question while you guys type some good questions in the inbox. And so my first question, actually, I'm going to direct to Nicholas, which is, you know, in this world where all these new and sophisticated attacks are constantly evolving, what should organizations be doing to help prepare for them?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's a continual question we're hearing with customers that we're talking to, and the things I like to reiterate over and over is, first and foremost, embrace zero trust and an assume breach mindset, right? Really think about that principle as you start to build out your cloud services, whether that's in M365, in Azure, or any of the other services that you might use on the cloud. Second, start looking at your supply chain and shore up your defenses there. And if you don't have a SOC to start monitoring what you have deployed in the different environments, look to some other partner or professional services that can really help you solve that problem if you don't have something in-house. Continue to invest in things like penetration testing and making sure what you've built and deployed in a secure manner is actually being secured. And then lastly, make sure you have the ability to investigate across your entire organization. I think one of the big things we see customers struggling with right now is across that kind of multi-cloud hybrid environment, right? I don't just have Azure, I have these other cloud providers as well, and I still have some things on-prem. So really making sure you have a comprehensive security strategy across that whole platform.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that. And let's take another one. There's a bunch of questions around XDR. I've heard of this XDR thing, but can you tell me what it means? Zvi, do you want to get that one?
Yeah, happy to take this one. In simple terms, XDR is extended detection and response. Extended protection and response, and really for two reasons. First of all, in XDR, you really want to make sure that you have a set of capabilities that can protect you first, protection platform, any detection platform, investigation platform across the pillars. In Microsoft, our answer to that M365 Defender is really protecting across all your pillars and not just looking at one solution at a time. We provide extended, if you want, protection response across identity, email, endpoint, and applications from Microsoft 365 Defender. And we do that across multiple clouds, Azure, Google, Amazon, also multiple platforms in Azure Defender. So you get that holistic capability of protecting your estate across and really seeing all the data coming into one place and being able to, if you want, correlate and relate to things each other, also protect upstream and downstream across these workloads.
Got it. No, that's great. And there's a question from Michael that actually relates to that, and perhaps you can recap the news a little bit from the last couple of days in answering this, Zvi. But As we think about XDR, historically Microsoft has had a number of consoles. There was an MDE console and an MDO console and an MDI console and a CASB console, and I could list all of them. It might take the whole session. And I think that was the customer's point. Like, what are we doing to simplify that set of console experiences? Where are we at in the unification approach? What was announced today, and what's the next step?
Well, that's a great question. So we went live with the GA with the Microsoft 365 Defender back in February last year. Since then, we did a lot of steps going beyond just mashing that information together and providing you an incident view across these pillars. And we are just now releasing our first iteration, if you want, on consolidating that into a single, if you want, view where you would not need to tab out from different solutions and get all that experience in one location. Security.microsoft.com will be that location where you are, be it you're running just our endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Office, Microsoft Defender for Identity. That will be your one-stop shop for consuming all of that, mashing together capabilities across, let's say, entities. So if you're looking now at an entity, be it a user, can you get in one, you will be getting in one place information that's coming from that MDI experience, what that user, what do we see about that user on the endpoints that he's actually being interacting with? What do we know to tell you about that user inbox? What can we tell you about applications that user is being accessed? Can you see all that in one place? Same goes to a machine, same goes to file entities. What can we tell you about these entities across all these workloads? So that's all coming into live in one place, security.microsoft.com. First two workloads to integrate tightly there are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Office, and the other two will follow closely.
Gotcha. And actually, Zvi, that was one of the questions is when Defender for Identity is coming. And yes, it is coming. We don't have a date for it, but yes, the strategy is to move that, or at least the security portions of MDI and CASB over time into the security portal. And so at some level, you will have two control planes, because I think there was an answer on that, a control plane to secure Azure and a control plane to secure the rest of your environment. And that will be a substantial simplification. And then already today, we've, as you said, made substantial progress in that with MDE and MDO unifying inside the 365 Security Center, and then also the shared incidents now between Sentinel. And so you can now more seamlessly navigate between Azure Sentinel and the Azure portal and Microsoft 365 Defender. Here's a follow-up question, which I think is a good one. There's a customer that's already been using all of the products, which is awesome, for some period of time, and is asking, what's really the difference in XDR? Like, if I was already using MDO and MDI and MDE, how is XDR different? Is it really just the unification, or is there something more that XDR adds than just that unification?
Okay, that's a very good question, and let's try to, it hits you in the experience and in the capabilities that you get in several layers. So the first one, we just talked about the portal. The fact that you actually go and consume the same experience in one location and get the data feed and streams coming from all the platforms in one place is a big change. Not only like we talked about, tabbing out, but actually having the same tool set all present itself in one place. There is another layer for that, which is super important in terms of the protection and your capabilities to go and investigate and remediate an attack, is that we actually combine together these signals into what we call a single incident. So our ability to actually go across and tell you that an alert that you're seeing coming from MDI is related to an alert that you see coming from MDO. And is connected with that activity on an endpoint, just for an example, is super critical for the time you're spending in your SOC to try and bring this information together. We bring you this capability out of the box. So this is part of the capability, it's added on. You do not need to go and buy another SKU from Microsoft. It's just part of what you get today when you run several of these solutions. In the last place, I think where it hits you, beside the actual value in identifying that and protecting you from the threats is really there's a lot of platform in the back end where you today may be maintaining 4 RBAC models, 4 APIs, settings, all in 4 different places. So how do we pull all that together for you to manage a single platform? Super in terms of time saving and consolidating all that into one place.
Awesome. A couple at you, Nicholas, actually. The first one, I'm a business customer that today is not using a lot of cloud. And so I have most of my stuff on premises. Does Azure Sentinel add value in that scenario, or does it only help me when I'm using Azure and cloud? Like, what does it do for me if I'm largely on premises?
Yeah, that's a great question. We hear that one a lot, and actually, it's a little bit of a combo, right? We have XDR on the Azure side, which we call Azure Defender, and that's really designed to help with your Azure workloads and your on-prem hybrid workloads, right? So you can deploy using Azure Arc to enable Azure Defender on all your on-prem workloads. You'll get some detection capability from there. It's also well integrated with Microsoft Defender for endpoints on the server side, so that you'll get additional detection capability there. And then, yes, you can roll all that data into Azure Sentinel and combine it with those third-party on-premise devices like firewalls, other things that you can't deploy the Azure Arc or monitoring agent to. So yeah, absolutely, you can get value from both of the products and protect that on-prem without having a whole Azure estate.
Gotcha, and of course you don't have to go through the deployment hassles of setting up an on-premise system or buying NAS or all that other stuff. It just works, right?
That's right.
And it was a good question, actually. The link is in the chat on, what are all the log sources, and I don't expect you to list them all, Nicholas, from the Microsoft 365 services, although that'd be a fun quiz, wouldn't it? To Sentinel, but maybe to add to that answer, some of these, do I have to pay for all of them? Are some of these free? Like, how does it work in terms of data coming from Microsoft 365 into Azure Sentinel?
Yeah, and depending on the day, Scott, I'd probably fail that quiz because we're consistently adding new connectors into Azure Sentinel, and we even announced this week 30 more connectors. Like, it's crazy. We've been really working hard, especially on a lot of the third parties like Cisco and Dynamics, which is first party, but really pulling in those other additional workloads that matter and that you want to monitor in Azure Sentinel. But to kind of shorten up and go back to the original question, we do have some data sources that are free, so things like Office 365 data, pulling all of the security alerts from the M365 Defender platform, Azure Defender, pulling all those security alerts in are all free as part of Azure Sentinel, and we store that data for up to 90 days for you. And then most of your other data sources besides those, and Azure Activity is one other one, they are paid sources. So you can pull in the raw data from things like M365D, your firewalls, and these other devices, but you will pay for that part of the storage of the data.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, cool. Just give me a second to scroll down. I'm reading all the excellent questions as we go forward. Actually, Zvi took an answer at this one, but I think it's a really good one to share with voice too. So one customer says, hey, I get alerts today. It goes back to the unification thing in multiple areas, in AIP and Mcas and MDE. I have alerts all over the place. And so the question was, how do I manage these alerts and incidents, and do I have to deal with it separately? The suggestion was, can I bring them together in a logic app? And so obviously with today's unification, there's some new news there in terms of the alerts in Microsoft 365 Defender and how we unify that. Zvi, do you want to add more on that?
Yeah, there's several layers to this question, right? So the straight answer is our unified alert view, which brings all the alerts across the platforms that you enabled inside of M365 Defender into a single view. So your ability to actually look at the alerts as they're related all in one place in a unified view. So that's available for you on security@microsoft.com as we bring these solutions together. But I think there is a broader question here. Okay, so Microsoft 365 Defender provides you then on top of that, the logic to pull them into a incident could be even a single alert incident, which is a lot of confidence for you to say there's a lot of logic running in the back end, and we couldn't correlate it to anything. So you just had a single alert, and we know that's a single event. That's also a lot of value for you as a SOC to understand that we did a lot of effort to try and correlate, but there's nothing to correlate to. And the third layer on that will be you will probably find yourself wanting to augment that data with other platforms that are not Microsoft 365 Defender, maybe because you don't have our full stack yet deployed, or maybe because you are just have another third-party solution, another solution which is not Microsoft that you're running in your stack. And that's where Sentinel comes into play, taking that incident, ingesting that alert queue into Sentinel, and then augmenting that with the data. I'm saying Sentinel, but we do have a connector to work with your SIM that you have today. But if you're looking at the Microsoft world, then the place you will take all that and have a single view of really what's happening across your estate, being your cloud, being your third-party solutions, that will be Sentinel for us.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
and
and
go ahead,
just
Nicholas.
to add, Scott, like one of the things that we just released this week as well is now a bidirectional sync of those incidents between M365 and Sentinel. It's something we've been hearing from customers, and now that just makes it easier for you to manage them, whether it's in the M365 portal or in Azure Sentinel.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, as of this week, we have the most integrated, I think, SIM and XDR solution on the planet. And the truth is we're just getting started in terms of the scenarios that we can continue to meld together of these two technologies. Speaking of SIM, do you want to talk about a customer today with an on-premises SIM from some vendor and is looking to move to Azure Sentinel? Like, how do they think about migration? How does that work, Nicholas?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, one of the things I talk with customers is like, start thinking about it early when possible. We've had some customers come to us and say, we want to go to Sentinel, but we have 1 month to get it done before our current SIM end of life or our contract ends or something. And that's really not the place you want to be in. So if you know you're coming up and you're going to start evaluating, start evaluating early so you can make that decision. And then, if you commit to move to Azure Sentinel, there's going to be a period where you're going to run this side-by-side SIMs, right? And you need to make some decisions about what workloads do I want to monitor with Azure Sentinel? We recommend starting with those cloud workloads because we have a lot of the connectors for cloud ready in there to go. And you can still do on-prem, but it's just much easier in the cloud. And then over time, you can start to move data sources from your on-prem SIM into Sentinel and eventually decommission that if you want to. But we have some customers that also want to run them both side by side as long as they continue to have the two environments. And so you kind of have to make a decision about, okay, where do I want to manage and triage these incidents? Is that in my on-prem SIM? And we have a connector and a way for you to pull that data via the Microsoft Graph Security API to your on-premise SIM, or do I want to manage it in the cloud? And we've actually worked with some of the SIM vendors and published a couple blogs on how you can send those on-prem incidents into Azure Sentinel so you can manage them from there. So it's a process that you go through just like any migration. I've been around and done AD migrations way back in the day, and it's kind of the same thing. You're going to run both for a little while until you finish that migration. So highly recommend customers start early. Consider what workloads you want to run in each respective SIM that you're going to have side by side for a while, and then where do you want to triage those incidents between the two SIMs, and just kind of setting that up front makes it much easier to get through that process.
Awesome, that's good. Let's throw a few in. This is the Stump the Experts question. I don't know the answer to this one, but with the attack training simulator now announced as GA, which of course we announced today, do either of you know what the licensing for that is? I thought that might stump you. It's worth a go.
Yeah. I know you're looking at me and sorry, no, it's a stump.
Okay, no worries.
You went licensing. I think we said, when you go into the licensing side, you lose me.
Okay, good. Then how about another one that might stump you? The Mcas, when will Mcas support forward proxy? I think was the question, if I remember rightly. I'm gonna have to scroll back a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I saw that question, and it was, is it on the roadmap? And I will say we don't have anything committed today. That's kind of where we're at.
Gotcha. They're very political. Love it. Cool. All right, let's keep going down here. What about, let's go back to the ARC one that you answered actually in text, but you answered 3 words and an exclamation point, and I liked your exclamation. So let's talk about ARC in general, actually. So why would a customer be using ARC on premises in the security context, and what would I do? What does that enable?
Yeah, I mean, not even just a security context. Let's take a step back, right? Like ARC provides a lot of value to those on-prem resources, right? You deploy the ARC agent, and you'll be able to connect those on-prem resources and see them as their Azure resources in the cloud. So you can start to manage those resources from the cloud, apply all those great things like Azure policy, et cetera, which starts to bring you into that security world, right? So now you can manage SQL and Kubernetes and some of these other workloads on top of your on-prem servers using ARC. And then you can enable security on top of that. So things like Azure Policy and then enabling Azure Defender. So now you can monitor, again, those workloads on-prem, both SQL, which we now have Azure Defender for SQL via Arc for your on-prem SQL nodes. So we'll detect attacks against that SQL box that's on-prem, bring those into Azure Security Center, which you can, again, connect to Azure Sentinel. So there's a lot of value just without security, but layering security on top of that just takes it even farther.
Gotcha, makes sense. So back to Sentinel, because it looks like you got a good follow up here. So you talked about the migration piece, and one of the questions that one of the customers has, it's Pedro, is, well, can I do the opposite rather than moving my on-premises data to Azure Sentinel? Can I take my Azure Sentinel data to on-premises? And before you're just taking a stab at it, many people's on-premises SIMs are highly constrained by the storage that they have and the number of sources that they have plugged into that. And so suddenly flooding your on-premises NAS with all of your cloud data and the on-premises SIM with all of the data from Azure Sentinel, it just may not have been architected for that. Most weren't. Most were architected to be cloud. But is there a subset of data that I can move back into my SIM? How would I do that? Do you see customers doing that, Nicholas?
Yeah, and actually, you made a really great point, right? We're recommending customers not to try to take all that data. Use Sentinel to do your detection, do your correlation on all your cloud data, and then bring just the security alerts and incidents back down to on-prem, so you can triage those alerts in your on-prem SIM. Like, why duplicate the data that you already have in Azure Sentinel and then try to like truckload that whole thing down to your on-premise SIM? Hopefully you have enough storage capacity to do that. So we say keep it light, bring those alerts. If you always need to go dig in farther, you can always bounce back to the Azure portal. But yes, if you really want to pull the data out, there are ways to do it via our APIs, but highly not recommended just because of the amount of data that you're going to have to pull down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, there's another, I'm going to generalize JP's question, but how long do most customers store their logs for? The actual customer question was around, is there value of moving historical logs from a historical SIM to Azure Sentinel? But from your perspective, working with many customers, what's a normal time to store my logs for? When does the value of those logs diminish?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, right? That's part of the reason with Azure Sentinel, we give customers 90 days is because we kind of learned from customers that that's like the baseline across most customers is around 90 days of keeping that data in a SIM. Now, there are some customers that want it available at a much longer rate, and so we can store it for up to 2 years. You pay a retention for that, but we can store it for up to 2 years. And there are other options too. You can offload it to some cold storage like storage accounts, and you can also offload it to things like ADX or Azure Data Explorer for an even longer term history. And so we have some customers that, they have different requirements like PCI or auditing or SOX that require them to store that data for 7 years. So they're just keeping it in case they get audited or if they ever really, really need to go back. But in most security incidents, people don't need to really go back past, 90, maybe 6 months, maybe a year at most. In most incidents, there's the rare occasion that, yes, you want to go back and look farther. But a lot of the time, and if you look at M365, we store that data for 180 days, kind of because of that reason too, right? Is most customers don't need to go back that far unless you have some type of auditing compliance. And again, there's solutions to solve that outside of Azure Sentinel as well.
Makes sense. And then Zvi, for you, more on the Defender for Endpoint. Of course, we're multi-cloud, multi-platform, and multi-platform is iOS and Android support. And as always, there's additional features that we could add in macOS, for example. I think was the customer question. But at some level, are we done in the work that we're doing there, or is there more coming? Is there anything more you can share? How much of a priority is macOS or iOS or Android to the overall team?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So by all means, we are not done. Yes, we released the capability for macOS and Linux and iOS. There is a parity gap that we're working to close very fast. The way that we look at it moving forward, we're already looking at it. It's just that we are in a race of closing that gap, is that we are releasing, moving forward, at least from an engineering, if you want, North Star capabilities across these platforms together. Now, we know that we are not there yet. There were specific questions and so on EDR for Mac. This is coming. We will close that gap. The North Star is feature parity as much as the platform allows. Not all platforms allows for all capabilities, but as much as the platform allows, feature parity across these platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one, and I know it's a historical perception is Microsoft protects Microsoft stuff, That's certainly not what we're doing anymore, and you just pointed that out. And in some cases, we'll have to work harder to get further ahead in areas. But our goal is, and you can see us executing on that systematically, to be your multi-cloud, multi-platform security provider, period. Absolutely. Good stuff. Nicholas, ask yourself a question. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't ask a question. I just replied and was saying, my Defender in preview is working great on my MacBook. So. Oh,
nice. Oh, that's awesome. That's always good when we're using our own stuff. I guess there was another question around threat hunting. It looks like Raviv got it. Just folks, just so you know, Raviv runs the engineering team all up for Microsoft 365 Defender, but interest in obviously increasing the length of retention of data for threat hunting. Yeah.
And I think just to point out, right, like we have a connector in preview now to pull that data over into Azure Sentinel, so you could store it there for a longer term.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, there's always going to be a balance of, cost and value when it comes to this data. And certainly, if you want to store it for a long period of time, Sentinel is always going to be the location for that, as opposed to the more SaaS service that is Microsoft 365 Defender. Keep the questions coming, folks. We're, I think, powering through most of them. I apologize if I missed your specific question on the way, and I'm going to scroll backwards to find this.
Yeah, I was scrolling up. I see one that's unanswered by anybody. It's what's the difference in cost for Azure Security Center via ARC for server and using the usual agent needed to get LTSC, which is the long-term service channel server on premise. There is no difference. There is an additional price to run ARC on your VMs, but from the Azure Security Center side, it is the same price whether you're using the ARC agent or using the current log analytics monitoring agent. Great question.
Exactly. And then oh gosh, I have to translate Microsoft acronyms, but in some legacy acronym which I've long since forgotten, but Tyler, I get it that you still think it's WDATP. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. There's an option to isolate a device. However, is there a plan to extend this to lock out the device so that even a local user cannot sign into the PC? Zvi.
Not that I'm aware of, to lock out the device completely.
Yes, and there's lots of upvotes for that. So that sounds like something we should be considering for sure.
So maybe I'm missing something if someone is on my team knows that we're already working. I don't have visibility into locking out completely the device. It's a good ask. Maybe we need to take a look at that if you say a lot of people are looking at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler, for the feedback. Really appreciate it. Okay.
I got another one I found in the chat, Scott, if we got a few minutes.
Go ahead.
Left, I think. There's a question from Michael. Is there a way to run some sort of calculator to help understand how large your current logs are? If an attack occurs and your logs grow crazy, is there some sort of filter to prevent a huge bill? So no, if something does happen and your logs go crazy, although we have not seen attackers, they want to be as stealthy as possible. They actually want to create less logs. So we have not seen typically more logs, except for maybe a DDoS attack, which, Azure DDoS and some of these other services, they're only going to log when that attack happens anyway. So we don't see a big spike when an attack happens in most customers, in most situations. Doesn't mean it can't happen. And in terms of a calculator, I'd recommend reaching out to your Microsoft account team. We do have some ways to help you estimate the size of the data that you might need in Azure Sentinel. But we don't have a simple web calculator for you.
And then on Defender for IoT, I think I understand this question, but I think there's a question which I'm going to rephrase slightly. But today, Defender for IoT, which of course it has an interesting name, but it protects OT devices as well as IoT devices. And many of those OT devices are, of course, not connected to the internet. And so it has a standalone on-premises management console, which was also part of the acquisition of the CyberX company. And so I'm going to reword this question are there plans, and where are we on those plans to take Defender for IoT and also enable it in internet connected modes for machines that are internet connected, not all of them will be, to send data up into Azure?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. So yeah, we've already done some basic integration with the Defender for IoT, formerly known as CyberX, and connected it to Azure. So those alerts will start flowing into Azure Security Center, and we already have a connector for Azure Sentinel as well, so we can start to get some of that data into there. So you'll continue to see us build on top of that and make it ready, much more accessible in those two consoles.
Gotcha. And I'll put you on the spot on another one, which I think is a really excellent question. What about India, network detection and response? What do we have for India?
Yeah, so quite a bit. We're actually making a ton of progress. We've had a bunch of announcements in the past week as well around network detection. And again, our focus really with network detection is in the cloud. You're not going to see us really go back and kind of build something for an on-premise network detection, but we've done a lot. And very recently, just announcing public preview of Azure Firewall Premium. And making that capability available in Azure. And so that's a cloud native auto scaling firewall service that we just added IPS and IDS capabilities to. So we also announced Azure Front Door, like it was vNext or Gen 2, I can't remember the exact name of it, but the new Azure Front. There you go. The new Azure Front Door capabilities, which includes CDN, the front door capabilities, WAF, security, all in one bundle, ready to go. So it makes it super easy for customers to protect those cloud workloads that they're publishing out on the internet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just building on that, we're seeing a lot of adoption, particularly by Azure customers, of the services you just described, because they're a whole lot easier to turn on. And as you pointed out, not necessarily designed to replace your on-premises Palo for a firewall for on-premises. That's not what we're doing at this stage. It's more about protecting your Azure workloads and doing it in a super simple way that's easy to deploy. And we're certainly getting a lot of adoption, which is exciting from that. Great. Are we at time or getting close?
Yeah, I think we're right at time. I think you got one more slide to share. And
okay, well, I want to thank Zvi and Nicholas and every one of you for engaging us with sometimes tough but always interesting questions. We certainly learn from these sessions. I'm going to take away at least one feature request that had lots of ups on it for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and as will the engineering team that's been listening in. I hope you got your question answered for sure. Obviously, to learn more about Microsoft security, do go look at the Ignite 2021 blog announcements, which included, of course, the Defender announcements, the Sentinel announcements, and more. Please do join us in the tech community. That's where you get lots of technical posts. Take a look at the security blog. That's where we tend to do most of our updates, including the security announcement. And come join us to learn more about SIEM and XDR. That's our strategy and approach, is to provide an integrated threat protection solution that spans modern cloud native SIEM with the most comprehensive XDR on the planet. Thanks very much for being a user of our technologies. Cheers.